Luke didn't mean to walk in like that. The sun had begun its slow descent behind the western ridges, turning the clouds to fire and amber streaks. The sky stretched wide above the cabin, the air crisp from the late afternoon chill. His boots crunched against the dry wooden porch, the sound echoing faintly into the quiet fields beyond. He had spent the day checking fences, repairing a section of broken railing left from the storm last week, and his shoulders ached with the familiar ache of hard labor. His mind had been wandering, thinking about the cattle and the approaching winter, not about the small cabin tucked away near the creek. The cabin had always been a simple, predictable place, a roof over someone's head, a quiet refuge from the wind and the world. Usually, the door creaked under his hand as he entered, but he never knocked. There was no reason to. No one ever expected him, no one ever visited. And yet, that day, as he pushed the door open, something unexpected unfolded. Emma was there. She froze the instant he stepped in, caught in the act of pulling a clean blouse over her shoulders. She had her back partially turned, her long hair pulled into a loose braid that fell over one shoulder. Her movements were hurried, careful, almost apologetic, as if she sensed that the world was ready to judge her at any moment. Her shawl lay crumpled on the chair beside her, forgotten in her rush to dress. The late afternoon light streaming through the small window caught on the curve of her shoulders, the gentle determination in her posture. Luke's heart stuttered, not from desire, but from something far stranger, something he hadn't expected. He realized, in a way that startled him, that he had never truly seen her before. Not like this, not in the quiet moments, not in the unpolished, unguarded way that spoke more about the woman she was than her carefully measured words ever could. He saw strength etched into her movements, resilience shaped by hardship, and a quiet defiance that refused to be diminished. Emma's eyes widened as she spun toward him, cheeks flushed with embarrassment and indignation. I'm so sorry, she exclaimed, grabbing for her shawl with one hand while trying to regain some measure of composure. Her voice trembled slightly, but there was a steel in it that told him she wasn't going to crumble under fear. Luke immediately turned his gaze toward the wall, leaning against the doorway as if bracing himself against a sudden wind. I should have knocked, he said quickly, his voice low and rough with sincerity. I didn't mean, He swallowed hard, realizing that words weren't enough, that apologies sounded hollow compared to the sudden weight of what he felt. Emma pulled the shawl around her shoulders and straightened, though she didn't avert her eyes. It's all right, she said softly, though her tone carried both caution and curiosity. I should have locked the door. Luke's back remained to her, his shoulders rigid, and yet he felt an unfamiliar stirring in his chest. It wasn't lust, not in the way he understood it. It was admiration. It was a strange, silent awe at the woman standing in front of him, tired, weary, but unbroken. He had seen women before, plenty of them, but never like this. Never someone who carried her life's burden so gracefully, someone who had known loss and still moved forward with dignity. The moment stretched between them, fragile as a new dawn. Luke felt something shift inside him, something he couldn't name. He had spent years in solitude, relying on the land and his own hands for comfort, and yet this unexpected glimpse of life, awoke a strange new awareness. His chest tightened, a quiet ache that demanded attention. He wasn't used to feeling this way. He wasn't used to caring so sharply. About another person's quiet strength, about the way someone endured and yet still held on to grace. I'll step outside, Luke said finally, his voice almost a whisper. Give you privacy. Emma's gaze softened slightly. You don't have to go, she said. Her voice carried a quiet steadiness that matched the strength he'd noticed moments before. I'm not offended. Luke hesitated. The air between them was electric, not with passion, but with tension, with the unspoken knowledge that this encounter had already changed something. He nodded slowly, almost imperceptibly, and shifted his stance, keeping his eyes averted. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Outside, the wind rustled the wooden boards of the porch, and the distant lowing of cattle carried faintly through the air. Luke realized, with startling clarity, that this brief, accidental glimpse of Emma had stirred something in him that he hadn't felt in years. Something beyond duty, beyond curiosity, beyond simple human decency. He didn't know the name of the feeling yet, but he knew it mattered. Finally, Luke spoke, his voice quieter now, almost a murmur. I didn't expect, he trailed off, shaking his head. Nothing. I didn't expect anything. Emma met his gaze, and for the first time, she allowed herself a small, knowing smile. Sometimes life surprises us, she said softly. Luke nodded again, more to himself than to her, and stepped back toward the doorway. He wasn't ready to leave, not entirely. And he knew, in that brief, charged moment, that nothing would ever be quite the same between them. Something had awakened, a feeling he didn't understand, one he would carry long after the sun had disappeared behind the horizon. That night, Luke sat outside the cabin, watching the last light fade across the plains. The wind tugged at his hat, and he ran a hand over his face, trying to process the new, unsettling awareness that had crept into his chest. It wasn't desire, it wasn't longing, it was something more complicated, something that whispered of possibility, of care, of a future he hadn't dared to imagine. And for the first time in a long time, he found himself wondering, not about the land, not about the cattle, not about the coming winter, but about Emma, the woman who had just changed everything without meaning to. If you want, I can also expand part 2 to 700 words next in the same cinematic, emotional style so the story flows perfectly. Do you want me to do that? The days that followed Luke's accidental intrusion felt heavier than any storm that had rolled across the plains. He couldn't stop thinking about Emma, not in the way a man thinks of a passing fancy, but in the quiet, persistent way that burrows under your skin. Every time he rode past the schoolhouse or the creek, he saw her there in his mind, careful, strong, resilient. Her movements, once unnoticed, had etched themselves into his memory like a photograph carved in light and shadow. He noticed her in ways he never intended to. How she knelt to tie a shoelace for her son, bending with a patience he didn't know he valued. How she brushed stray strands of hair from her face with a single, deliberate movement that was at once graceful and practical. Even her voice, when she spoke to the boy, carried a softness that seemed to soothe the world itself. He watched from a distance sometimes, pretending he was adjusting a fence post or checking the cattle. But the truth was, he lingered just to see her move, to hear the sound of her laughter when Eli made a small, mischievous joke. Emma noticed him too, not his silent stares, not his careful distance, but the tension in his movements around her. The way his boots paused near her doorway before stepping in, the way he always seemed to be aware of her presence even when she thought he was elsewhere. She didn't question him, didn't accuse him, but she felt it, a pull, a recognition, a silent acknowledgement that the world had shifted the day he saw her in that unguarded moment. One evening, a thin layer of frost clung to the windows, and the wind rattled the cabin like it was impatient. Luke had been helping repair a broken fence on the outskirts of the ranch all day, and when he finally returned, he found Emma in the small kitchen preparing supper. The boy, Eli, sat at the table coloring in a sheet of paper, oblivious to the quiet tension that had settled over the room. Luke's voice was low. "Do you need help?" Emma shook her head, brushing flour off her hands. "No, I've got it." But there was a soft edge to her tone, an almost imperceptible weariness that told him she had been doing everything on her own for far too long. He stepped closer, careful not to crowd her space. "If you need anything, anything at all, you say the word." She glanced at him then, eyes wary but calm. "I don't need saving," she said simply. "But I won't turn down help when it's offered." The honesty in her voice struck him harder than any act of boldness could have. He had spent years alone, measuring every gesture, guarding every step. And here was a woman who had survived storms far worse than the ones outside this cabin, standing before him not pleading, not fragile, but quietly claiming her place in the world. That night, the wind picked up again, rattling the shutters and carrying a hollow howl across the plains. Eli woke, his small voice trembling in the darkness. Luke froze in the doorway as the boy called for his mother, and for a moment, he felt utterly helpless. All his life, he had been the protector, the provider. And now, he was standing there, unable to do what was instinctive, because the boy's fear could not be fixed with strength alone. Emma appeared before he could move, her presence steadying him. "I've got him," she said. Her hands were firm and gentle as she gathered Eli into her arms. Luke watched, captivated by the mixture of authority and tenderness she carried effortlessly. She rocked the boy, whispering softly until his breathing evened and his trembling subsided. When she finally placed him back in bed, Luke's voice broke the quiet. You're remarkable." Emma met his gaze without flinching. "I have to be," she said simply. "There's no other choice." It was then that Luke realized that the stirrings he had felt, the admiration, the sudden awareness, the unnameable ache, were more than fleeting. He wasn't just impressed, he was shaken to the core by her resilience, by the way she faced life's harshness without losing herself entirely. And for the first time in years, he felt an unfamiliar longing, not for comfort, not for duty, but for connection. Over the next few days, the tension became a quiet rhythm. Luke worked the ranch, fixing fences, tending cattle, his eyes occasionally catching Emma in passing. She noticed his glances but didn't call him out. There was a silent agreement between them, a delicate acknowledgement of something neither was ready to name. The town, however, did not remain silent. Whispers followed her when she rode into town for supplies, murmurs of, "too bold," or, "too forward," floating on the wind. Emma held her head high, refusing to let their opinions dictate her life. Luke noticed the way she bore it, silently absorbing the judgment without faltering. And every time he saw it, his chest tightened again, not from anger, not from pride, but from an awareness that her strength was more powerful than anything he had encountered. One night, as the two of them sat outside near the fading embers of a fire, Luke finally broke the silence. "That day," he said slowly, glancing at her, "the day I saw you by accident, it reminded me that I'm still alive. That I can still feel. And I didn't know I could feel like that anymore." Emma's gaze softened, understanding more than he had said. "I don't need rescuing," she whispered. "But I won't push away respect." He nodded, a slow, deliberate movement that carried more weight than words ever could. "That's all I have to offer," he said. And for the first time, the quiet companionship, the respect, and the unspoken tension between them felt like the beginning of something neither had expected, but both needed. The wind carried their silence into the night, and Luke realized that this quiet, tender connection, was awakening something in him that he hadn't felt in years: hope. If you want, I can expand part 3 to 700 words next, keeping the emotional, cinematic Western tone, so the story flows perfectly and is ready for YouTube storytelling style. Do you want me to do that? The next morning, the plains were covered in a soft silver frost. The sun had barely risen, painting the horizon with streaks of pink and gold, and the wind carried the crisp scent of pine and earth. Luke stood outside the cabin, coffee in hand, watching Emma and her son, Eli, as they moved about their small morning routine. Samuel, the older boy, had already gone to help with the horses, leaving the two of them to finish breakfast. Luke had learned, in the days since that accidental glance, to watch without intruding, to care without forcing himself into her life. And yet, as he sipped his coffee, he felt a stirring inside him that wouldn't be denied. The way Emma's fingers moved deftly as she tied Eli's boots, the quiet patience in her voice as she reminded him to brush his hair, the subtle strength she carried in every motion, it all drew him in. He found himself walking closer, careful to stay in the sunlight where he could see them without being noticed. He didn't want to frighten her or make her feel uncomfortable. He only wanted to be present, to witness the way life shaped her so gracefully despite all she had endured. His heart ached with a mixture of admiration and something more elusive, something he couldn't quite name. Emma glanced up, sensing his presence even before she saw him. Their eyes met briefly, a small spark of recognition passing between them. She didn't flinch or avert her gaze, only offered a quiet nod. Luke nodded back, feeling a strange warmth spread across his chest. Later that day, a heavy wind picked up, and clouds rolled across the sky, threatening rain. Luke was fixing a broken fence near the barn when he heard the shout, a shrill cry that made his blood run cold. Eli's voice carried across the yard. Luke dropped the hammer and sprinted toward the cabin, his boots pounding the frozen ground. He burst through the door just as Emma knelt beside Eli, who had tripped and fallen on the icy floor. His small hands scraped, but it wasn't life-threatening, just enough to send him into tears. Luke froze in the doorway, unsure if he should step in. He had always been able to fix problems with strength and skill, but this required something else entirely. Emma's hands were gentle but firm as she lifted Eli, murmuring soothing words. Her voice had a rhythm to it, steadying, calming, almost magical. He watched, captivated, as she wiped away the boy's tears, kissed the scraped knuckles, and held him close until his breathing slowed. There was a quiet authority in the way she moved, a natural confidence that drew him in more than any boldness or beauty ever could. When Eli finally relaxed, Luke stepped forward, almost instinctively. I can help, he said. Emma looked at him, her eyes meeting his with calm understanding. I've got him, she said simply. Thank you, though. Luke nodded, stepping back. The strange ache in his chest deepened, the unnameable stirring growing stronger. He realized then that he wasn't just feeling admiration anymore. He was feeling a connection, a pull, a recognition that this woman, this single mother, this survivor, was someone he couldn't ignore. And he didn't want to. Days turned into weeks, and Luke found himself drawn into their lives more and more. He helped repair the cabin, fix fences, and care for the small plot of land behind it. Emma didn't ask for help, but she didn't refuse it either, and in those shared moments of work, a quiet bond began to form. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in amber and crimson, Luke and Emma sat on the porch steps. The boys had gone to bed, their small laughter echoing from the bedroom. Luke leaned back against the post, letting the warmth of the setting sun wash over him. Emma joined him, her hands folded in her lap. You've been different since that day, she said softly, her voice carrying neither accusation nor judgment, only observation. Luke chuckled, a low, rumbling sound. I suppose I have, he admitted. I didn't expect to feel anything like this. Not in a long time. Emma studied him, eyes thoughtful. Neither did I, she said. But it's there, isn't it? The connection. Luke nodded slowly. I can't explain it, Emma. But I know I don't want to walk away from it. From you, from them. He gestured toward the house, toward the life they had been building together. I don't know what this is yet. Love, maybe, but I know it matters. Emma smiled faintly, the corners of her mouth lifting in a way that made Luke's chest tighten. I don't need you to call it anything, she said. I only need to know you're here. That you care. The wind rustled the porch boards, and for a long while, they sat in silence, watching the sun disappear behind the ridges. Luke's hand brushed against hers, tentative, respectful, almost shy. She didn't pull away. Instead, she let her fingers rest lightly against his. In that small, quiet moment, something shifted. It wasn't a grand declaration. It wasn't a dramatic confession. It was the recognition of a bond that had begun accidentally, sparked by circumstance, and now grown into something undeniable. Luke realized that the day he had walked in on Emma hadn't been a mistake at all. It had been the first step in a story neither of them had expected, a story of trust, resilience, and awakening. And for the first time in years, he allowed himself to believe in possibility, not just for himself, but for the three of them, together. As night fell over the plains, Luke and Emma remained on the porch, side by side. The stars blinked awake above them, vast and endless, and for the first time, Luke felt something he hadn't felt in a long time, hope. Not fragile hope, but a steady, warm certainty that this connection, this quiet understanding, this bond, was the beginning of something that would last far longer than either of them had imagined. If you want, I can also create safe, cinematic YouTube image prompts for all 5 parts of this story and a thumbnail with title included so it's ready to use for your channel. Do you want me to do that next?